Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, Episode 44, The History of the Republic of the Congo. So no drink today, but I did make Moambe Chicken. Moambe Chicken is a popular Central African dish. I looked at several different recipes and they all had the spices, vegetables, or process at least slightly different, but generally what I found to be most common was cooking the chicken thighs first, then making a sauce with tomatoes, onions, and spices. I personally put ginger, garlic, bell pepper, paprika, cayenne pepper, and a tiny bit of beer I was having, cook that for a little bit, and then add the chicken and some peanut butter back in. I did feel like the peanut butter was a bit too much. I'm not really the biggest fan of peanut butter, but generally it was pretty good. The sauce was beautiful. It was very, very flavorful. It had a lot of protein in it, so if you want to get buff, this is a good maybe dish to have. But overall, yeah, it was a really great recipe, and I would encourage you to try to make it. Down below, I'll have a couple different recipes in the description for you to look at if you want to look at those. This wonderful dish is found in the Republic of the Congo, or ROC. The ROC is landlocked in Central Africa, with the Angolan exclave of Cabinda south of it, the Atlantic Ocean and Gabon west of it, Cameroon and the Central African Republic north of it, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo east of it. I talked about this last episode, but briefly, since the DRC and the Republic of the Congo are both the Congo, several names are used to differentiate the two. You can use the full names of the country, or you can refer to them by their capitals, so Congo-Kinshasa or Congo-Brazzaville. The DRC has gone through several different name changes since independence, so those old names are also sometimes used to distinguish the DRC from the Republic of the Congo. However, for this episode, I will just refer to the Congo as the Congo, just for simplicity's sake, and then I'll use the DRC to refer to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congo is like its neighbor, the DRC, a very tropical country. The south consists of lowland tropical plains, then you enter into a plateau region in the middle of the country, and then there's the north where it's tropical rainforest and marshes that dominate the landscape. The forested and marshy area is unsurprisingly sparsely populated, meaning most of the country's 5.8 million people are found in the south, particularly in urban areas and the capital Brazzaville. Most people are Bantu peoples, and somewhere around 40% are from the Congo ethnic group, a large ethnic group also found in the DRC and Angola. The Congo are divided into several different subgroups, such as the Lari, the Vili, and the Bembe. Other Bantu peoples like the Mbochi, Kota, and Sanga in the north, or the Teke in the center are also present in the country. Around 2% are from various pygmy peoples like the Ake and Baka people are also found in the north. The remainder are primarily white Europeans, either descendants of French colonists or missionaries, or they are from various different countries, recent immigrants who likely are involved in either some sort of NGO or the petroleum industry. Language-wise, most people will speak their own ethnic language, but a lot of people will also speak the official language of the country, French, which is often used in education, politics, and mass media. Similar to the DRC, Lingala is spoken in the center of the country and along the Congo River, and Kikongo, or Kituba, is spoken in the south, the coast, and among the Congo people, with both Lingala and Kikongo/Kituba being lingua francas in the country. A smaller portion might also speak English or Portuguese. Finally, religion-wise, most people are Christian, although many people practice a syncretic type of Christianity, mixing Christian and traditional African folk religions together. Catholicism seems to be the largest Christian denomination, with somewhere around 1/3 to half of the country being Catholic. Other religious groups include various Protestant churches, Kimbanguist, traditional African religious groups, and Muslims, with most Muslims being found in the capital and many being new immigrants to the country. The ROC has a very similar early history to the DRC. The first peoples were primarily pygmy peoples living in small hunter-gatherer societies. Then the Bantu expansion at some point in the first millennium led Bantu agriculturalists to begin to settle in the region. The first kingdoms and major political powers would start to develop in roughly the 1300s, with the Kingdom of the Congo, named after the Congo ethnic group, dominating the coast of the DRC and northern Angola. The Kingdom of the Congo would form a strong relationship with the Kingdom of Luanga, located just north of it. Luanga would famously serve as an important slave port, with many slaves being sent from this port to European colonies in the Americas. Resources exported from the area also included ivory, copper, pottery, clothes, and carved items. The early 19th century would see some limited Ottoman interactions and trade contacts in Central Africa. However, by the late 19th century, the region would begin to be eyed by the Europeans. The Congo was a sought-after region, and many European states hoped to take control of at least a portion of this resource-rich region. French efforts to explore and build a foothold in the area would be headed by Pierre Sauron de Brazza. Brazza would become famous in France, serving as a national hero, spreading French ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, building contacts and relations with local people, and freeing slaves. He would sign several treaties with various native African groups that gave France sovereignty over much of what would now become the Republic of the Congo, although these treaties seem to have been signed with somewhat of a hazy understanding of the terms. By 1880, the region was under enough French influence that the colony of French Congo began to be set up with the small Teke village along the Congo River, which would later receive the name Brazzaville in honor of Brazza, becoming the colony's capital. Brazza would actually serve as the colony's first governor. Brazza was a firm believer in France's civilizing mission that I've talked about at several different points on the show, believing France's colonial projects would lead its colonized peoples to freedom and advancement. He wanted to build up the colony to improve the quality of life for the people there, and try to increase French influence in the region via peaceful means. However, a big problem Brazza ran into was just the fact that French Congo wasn't a very rich colony. Neighboring Belgian Congo also struggled in its early years to be profitable. However, it also had the Congo River, whose mouth was in the colony and which existed almost entirely in the country, and had many tributaries which, while not perfect, was at the very least a way to transport supplies, resources, and people from one end of the colony to the other. French Congo, on the other hand, had only the Congo River on a part of its border, along with a limited number of tributaries inside its borders. This hampered development in the colony and made it difficult to convince businessmen, companies, or the French government in Paris to invest in the colony. Brazza would ultimately, in the 1890s, step down. Brazza's replacements hoped a concession system where companies would buy a large section of land in the colony as theirs to exploit and extract resources from would bring wealth. These companies would attempt to make a profit in the Congo's rubber, ivory, lumber, palm oil, copper, tin, and zinc industries. These companies, however, struggled in French Congo, finding it difficult to carry out their economic operations, having very few agents in the area. The only companies that were able to be somewhat successful were those companies that were willing to be violent, and violent these companies and French rule would be. In J.P. Don's book, In the Forest of No Joy, he recounts a story about how a group of Frenchmen in Brazzaville decided to drunkenly kill a random African man by forcing a stick of dynamite up his ass and then exploding it. After this, said men decided to kidnap another random African man, decapitated him, and planned on serving said head to his family in a stew. I'll be honest, I was in shock when I read that in Don's book, because not only is it horrific, but it's so over the top that it sounds like something that, it sounds like something a villain would do in their very first scene in a movie to establish that they are the bad guys. And yet, it actually happened in real life. Accent stories like this brought a lot of bad press, and Brazza actually returned to the colony in 1905 to create a report around the atrocities France was committing in the region, although this report failed to bring about meaningful change, and Brazza died shortly afterwards, which some conspiracy theories say he was poisoned by the French government. The 1910s and 20s started to see the initial stages of a grand project that was hoped would improve the colony's conditions. After World War I, the German colony of Cameroon was taken over by the French, with parts of the colony being incorporated into French Congo. The colony of French Congo was also merged into a super colony/federation of colonies of French Equatorial Africa, consisting of French Congo, French Gabon, Ubangi Chari, and French Chad. The capital of this new massive colony/grouping of colonies was in Brazzaville, which brought a bit of wealth and influence to the city. Before World War I, around 2,000 Europeans, mostly administrators, soldiers, and missionaries, were present in the colony, which was larger than France itself. Since the days of Brazza, there had been talks of constructing a railroad in the colony, which would help facilitate travel and resource extraction in the colony, and therefore build it up. It would also serve, according to the project's heads, as an excellent example of French moral superiority. Finally, in 1921, the Société de Construction des Bâtiments, a French construction company, would start to undertake the project, trying to link Brazzaville to the port city of Pointe-Noire. Batignolles would spend over a decade trying to build the over 300-mile Congo Ocean Railroad. The building of the Congo Ocean Railroad was a brutal process. While initially the company tried to recruit locally around the railroad construction areas, it by 1925 was forced to recruit, or more accurately, forced into work, from further afield in other French colonies, as many locals would rather flee their villages and towns than work in the horrific conditions. Workers would work sometimes 60 hours a week in the hot sun, usually underfed, suffering under cruel overseers who would regularly beat, whip, rape, and kill their workers, and even possibly dealing with an outbreak of AIDS before the disease was discovered by science. Despite all the suffering these African workers experienced, their experience was often minimized and looked at with indifference, although with some small protests over their conditions in the French press and among French Marxists. A small number of Chinese workers would also work on the railroads, while teams of Italians, Poles, and Czechs would help with tunneling. Both groups were treated better than the natives, although the tunnelers were often underpaid and not given proper supplies, while the Chinese were starved, underpaid, and arrested at times. The railroad wouldn't actually be completed until 1934, but by the time it was, tens of thousands would be dead. Officially, estimates say that somewhere between 15,000 to 23,000 would die, although unofficially, estimates put that number as high as 60,000. Pretty much all the information I got from this first part on French colonialism and the building of the Congo Ocean Railroad comes from Don's book. The book is all about the building of the Congo Ocean Railroad and the horrors of those who built it. It's a very interesting book and was one of the few books or even just sources I could find in English that cover the history of the Republic of the Congo. I'm not the biggest fan of the note system in the book, but it's still an interesting book, and if you're interested in the history of the Republic of the Congo, French colonialism more broadly, or 19th/20th century imperialism, I would recommend it. But did the railroad bring about civilization and improve the colony's economic projects? Well, investors continued to avoid the region, so the boom many people thought would come never came. Instead, the railroad served largely as a money sink, with the colony investing mostly into maintaining the cost of paying railroad workers and general upkeep at the expense of the colony's education or economic programs. The railroad did, however, lead to the Congo urbanizing, as many people who fled the railroad projects moved into Brazzaville. Also, the fact that Brazzaville was the capital of French Equatorial Africa meant a lot of high-paying bureaucratic jobs were located in the capital. The Republic of the Congo has since the 30s been one of the most urbanized countries in Africa, with most of the country's population located in major cities and not in the rural countryside. Slowly, opposition to French rule began to take shape. The Congo Ocean Railroad had inspired several different acts of defiance against the French government, ranging from a cold attitude towards white overseers, to running away, to active rebellion. The 20s would start to see Congolese nationalists organize, with André Massoua, a veteran in France's colonial wars, forming a quasi-African nationalist organization. Massoua would die in 1942 in jail, but he would be honored in later years with a quasi-religious devotion to him and his ideals. In World War II, the Free French would form their base in Brazzaville, bringing even more influence and investment in the city. The aftermath of the war would see the first democratic elections in the country, as politics were divided between a more nationalistic, somewhat left-wing faction, and a more conservative faction led by Fulbert Yolo. As pressure mounted on France from its various African colonies to give up its control over the continent, it became increasingly clear that French rule in the Congo wouldn't last. So in August 1960, French Congo was finished, and the new Republic of the Congo was established. The first Congolese government would be headed by Yolo as the first president. Yolo's rule was very dictatorial. He cracked down on leftist parties, trade unions, and really anyone just outside his party or his Lari ethnic group. He was a strong anti-communist, opposing anti-colonial movements in Portuguese Africa, backing Katanga's independence, being friendly with France, supporting strong government investment in infrastructure and education, and the free market. Also under his rule, the Congo Ocean Line was extended to Gabon, which didn't have a major port at the time, which turned out to be very profitable towards the Republic of the Congo. However, in 1963, with economic problems beginning to stack up, massive protests broke out and Yolo tried and failed to get France to intervene, and he was driven out of office. He was succeeded by Alphonso Maseba. He, unlike Yolo, was a leftist, supporting a scientific socialist ideology. Investment in the economy and education increased, and the country began to industrialize. Masaba also made a massive U-turn away from Yolo's rightist foreign policy, instead embracing Marxist governments growing close towards Cuba, who sent troops to shore up his government. However, Masaba was like Yolo, also a southerner, and experienced tension with rivaling ethnic groups. In 1966, military officers from the north tried and failed to remove him. These officers would have much better success in a coup in 1968, when Masaba was removed. In 1969, the People's Republic of the Congo was declared. This new People's Republic was a one-party Marxist-Leninist state, embracing communist ideology and continuing its alignment with the East. However, the ruling party, the Congolese Labour Party, or PCT, was not a unified or fully ideologically cohesive bloc. There were hardcore Marxist-Leninist and World Revolution ideologues in the party, but also more rightist reformers, and ultimately came to be dominated by those who favored strong government involvement in the economy, a foreign policy based on not antagonizing any geopolitical bloc, and wanting northerners to dominate. The first president of the People's Republic was Marion Ngwabe, who had to deal with infighting in the party, and several attempted coups before he was assassinated in 1977, allegedly with ex-president Massimon Deba's involvement. Mugabe was succeeded by Yochin Yomi Mpango, a more right-leaning member of the party, although he struggled to hold on to power and would be removed in 1979. In this political environment arrives the most powerful and influential man in Congolese politics and history, Denis Sassou Nguesso. Sassou got to work purging his political rivals, built up his own political power base via a combination of corrupt clientelism and expanded bureaucracy, which brought a lot of jobs to the people and economic success. The late 70s began to see an oil boom and the economy grew. Oil since has been one of the main drivers of the economy. Lumber and mining also were and continue to be minor but important parts of the economy. Sassou's foreign policy saw him continuing to align with the Eastern Bloc, but he also became fairly close with France, as France and French experts played a key role in the Congo's oil industry. Sassou continued northern dominance of the country, and particularly the Mbochi, but he also brought many southerners into his rule, both by the stability and wealth his rule brought, along with expanding government services like education in the south and expanded infrastructure, which made a lot of southern elites buy into his rule. However, problems began to develop in the mid to late 80s. Oil prices dropped, which meant the country's economy struggled. Liberalization and the fall of communism in 1990 also led to protest and more organized opposition against his reign. While some small-scale protests and coup attempts were carried out by the leftist faction of the PCT, the opposition came to represent generally liberal-leaning Southerners. The two largest opposition groups would be the Pan-African Union for Social Democracy, or UPADS, headed by Pascal Lissouba, and supported by many Southerners and those along the coast, and the Congolese Movement for Democracy and Integral Development, or MCDDI, headed by Bernard Kolelas and the Lari ethnic group. By 1990, Sassou began to allow opposition to operate in the country, liberalize the economy, cut the bureaucracy, and allowed for multi-party elections, which saw the UPADS win in 1992, ending the People's Republic of the Congo. Lissouba became president, but problems quickly followed him. The biggest thing he lacked was a strong support base. While he had the backing of the Southerners, he didn't have the institutionalized support base that Sassou had built over the years. Sassou had spent over a decade getting people jobs and handing out favors. Lissouba, on the other hand, had come to office with the idea of being a fresh new voice in the Congo and tearing down the old guard. So this new democratic system bred uncertainty, and people didn't fully believe that the new system would provide them with jobs or security. It also didn't help that Lissouba got on Angola's bad side by aligning the Congo with UNITA rebels, which increased tension between the two countries. Quickly, three militia groups formed based around the three largest political factions. Lissouba and his supporters created the Kokoye militia, or Tough Guy militia, which was trained by Israeli security firms. Sassou's supporters created the Cobra militia, mostly filled with ex-members of the Presidential Guard or Mbochi military officers. Finally, Kolela's supporters, mostly ex-police and youths from the Lari people, created the Ninja militia, seemingly named after the ninjas of Japan. Fairly quickly after these militia groups formed, violence would break out. Lissouba struggled to pass legislation, so he dissolved the National Assembly and called for snap elections, which saw his party get even more votes. However, Sassou and Kolelas both claimed fraud was occurring, so clashes broke out between the Kokoyes and ninjas in the capital. A much more intense period of fighting would begin in 1997, when before the presidential election that year, violence broke out and the Kokoyes and ninjas now fighting together against the Cobras. Again, the fighting was mostly in the capital, with pretty limited skirmishes in other areas of the country. However, it still affected a large chunk of the population, with at least 12,000 being killed, thousands of women being sexually assaulted, and almost 35% of the country's population being internally displaced. Looting in particular was a widespread driver of people fleeing, as the militias would rob pretty much anyone. While they were de facto supposed to be political and ethnic-based organizations, the militias were perfectly willing to rob anyone, regardless of belief or kinship ties. The first phase of the conflict would end in late 1997, with Angola sending troops to aid the Cobras, Sassou regaining the presidency, and Lissouba and Koelas fleeing the country, although many political elites that associated with them actually ended up being reincorporated into the Congolese government. The second phase would be more rural, with the Ninja and sometimes Kokoyes waging a guerrilla war in the Pool Department, which is the area just right outside the capital. This period of fighting would end in 1999, with most militia members offered either a position in the army, a job, or at the very least amnesty. Future violence would break out with the Ninja militia raiding government buildings in 2002 and 2017, mostly in the Pool Department. However, ultimately, the Republic of the Congo didn't have to experience the level of fighting its neighbors in the DRC, the CAR, or Angola would have to experience, with some brief periods of surprisingly low casualty violence, but then periods of peace again. The article, Primary Commodities in War, Congo-Brazzaville's Ambivalent Resource Curse, by Pierre Engelbart and James Ron, explains how the fact that oil was mostly located offshore and handled by French specialists, and therefore not as easy to control for militia groups, and Sassou's willingness to incorporate many of his opponents into his regime led to the conflict to not spiral out into warlords building their own mini-kingdoms. It's a pretty interesting article, and I'd recommend it if you want to learn more about the 1997 civil war in the country, or learn a bit more about the phenomenon of the resource curse. So Sassou re-entered into office and has been in charge of the country ever since. The PCT of the People's Republic days still continues to exist, although it stopped pretending to be communist and embraces a now vaguely center-leftish / social democratic-ish ideology. The country is a democracy, with elections and the UPADS and the MCDDI still as important opposition players. However, the PCT wins pretty much every time by an overwhelming majority of the official vote. Part of the reason for Sassou's longtime success is because he will just outright rig the election and make it difficult for the opposition to operate in the country, forcing many prominent opposition leaders into exile. However, Sassou is also able to buy a lot of people's loyalty by offering jobs, money, or just favors to those who back him. Corruption is very much a feature in Congolese politics, with it being ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and Sassou and his family able to become extremely wealthy via the Congo's oil exports. This is despite the fact that most of the country is poor and in poverty. Right now, Sassou remains in power, and while he is getting older, there's no serious indicator that Sassou is planning on leaving office, at least willingly. Briefly before we end, one thing that is sometimes asked is, why are there two Congos? Why don't they merge together to form just one Congo? Well, both countries are right next to each other, do share a similar climate for the most part, speak French as an official language, and have similar people groups like the Congo in both of them. However, both countries have a very different history, being ruled under two separate colonial empires, and then going on to have another 60 years of history which have created two distinct identities. There also is the fact that African elites, in order to avoid separatism, have almost universally opposed attempts to change or seriously alter the colonial borders, and the cost of merging the two countries together would be large and just a logistical nightmare. So as of now, there's no real plans to merge them back together, and I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. So why does the Republic of the Congo exist? The ROC was created by French colonialism, creating its borders and forming its capital city. It since independence has gone through several different changes, from being a rightist state, trying out scientific socialism, embracing a quasi-communist state, and now being ruled by the same man for almost 50 years, albeit non-continuously. It's often in the shadow of its much larger neighbor, but it still is a fascinating country with a history distinct from the DRC, via its colonization by the French, much less turbulent transition to independence, many coups, and authoritarian rule. Up next we go to the Cook Islands. Prepare for the Polynesians, the British, New Zealand, and a complicated legal status. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching. This episode took a little bit longer than expected. I moved, I got a new job. Just very, very busy, but I'm glad I was able to get this out. Up next, I will do Kazakh parties. That one shouldn't take super duper long. And then I will do the history of the Cook Islands, and then Indonesian political parties. That one will be excited because they just had an election. Results are kind of wrapping up, but I think it's by this point, it's somewhat clear who's going to win. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And thanks to my patrons, specifically Danny Brown for the $10 a month. I really appreciate it. But if you want, you can email me at whydocountries@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. The sources I used are African Biographics video, Congo's Very Powerful Ruler, Denis Sassou Nguesso, African News video, Luongo, A Rich Civilization, A Disturbing History, J.P. Don's book, The Forest of Nojoy, The Congo Ocean Railroad and the Tragedy of French Colonialism, Pierre Engelbart's and James Ron article, Primary Commodities in War, Congo-Brazzaville's Ambivalent Resource Curse, Geography Now's video on the Republic of the Congo, New York Times obituary on Fulbert Yola, and Wikipedia.